Imagine stepping up to a podium. You look out at the audience, take a breath, and get ready to deliver a presentation you've spent weeks perfecting.
Right.
But before you speak a single syllable, before your brain even formulates the first word, the people in that room have already subconsciously judged your competence.
Oh, absolutely. They're judging your leadership potential, whether they trust you, all of it.
Exactly. We like to think of communication as this clean binary exchange of information, like, I don't know, typing a text message and hitting send.
Yeah, but we are actually swimming in this completely hidden matrix of nonverbal and psychological cues.
It's wild, and that machinery is our focus for you today in this deep dive. We are cracking open the invisible cues that dictate our daily lives.
It is a profoundly murky landscape, honestly. I mean, the actual words tumbling out of our mouths are essentially just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, and there's this massive invisible machinery operating below the surface. So we're looking at things like the precise pitch of your voice or a microscopic pause mid-sentence.
Or even, the brand of the watch in your wrist.
Yeah. We constantly judge and are judged by things we aren't even consciously aware of. So the mission today is to give you a working knowledge of these subconscious systems. It really feels like the ultimate tool for navigating the modern world.
Because once you understand the mechanics of this matrix, you stop being a passive participant. You can start, interacting with it intentionally.
By the end of this conversation, you will have a literal cheat sheet to decode social hierarchies, handle disagreements, and project genuine authority. So let's start at the foundation, the biological sound of our voices.
The vocal command center.
Right. I always assumed the content of a message was the most important part, but the data on vocal delivery is just staggering.
It really is. Research from UCLA's Communication Studies Department completely upends how we think about talking. They found that vocal qualities, so the tone, the resonance, the rhythm, account for 38% of your communication impact.
38%.
Yeah. And the actual literal words you carefully selected, they only account for 7% of the impact.
That almost feels unfair to the dictionary, honestly. 38% versus 7%.
Well, neuroscientists look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology. When someone hears your voice, their brain processes it in like a fraction of a second.
Scanning for threats, right?
Exactly. They're scanning for what are called social dominance cues. Long before we had complex language, our ancestors relied on auditory signals to figure out who was a threat, who was a leader, and who was submissive.
So today, controlling the physical properties of your voice is basically a backdoor into controlling how people perceive your capacity to lead.
You nailed it. It's a biological hack.
And we actually have some fascinating historical proof of this in action. Let's look at Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, a perfect example.
Yeah, because early in her political career, she was heavily criticized for sounding shrill, hurried, and, nervous, but she didn't just accept that as her permanent voice.
No, she fundamentally altered it using a technique called strategic pace variation.
How does that actually work in practice?
Well, it comes down to manipulating the listener's cognitive rhythm. The baseline speaking pace for a typical, engaging conversation should sit somewhere around 150 to 160 words per minute.
Okay, so brisk enough to keep the brain stimulated.
Right. But Thatcher worked with a vocal coach to deliberately slam the brakes when she needed to establish undeniable authority. For her most crucial points, she would drop her pace down to 90 to 110 words per minute.
I picture it like aggressively throwing a tennis ball at someone's face.
That's a great visual.
Right. If you just hurl information at them nonstop, they can't catch the ideas, they just flinch. But a strategic slowed down pace is like a gentle underhand toss. You are physically giving their brain the necessary time to catch and absorb the weight of the concept.
And that physical time is essential. Plus, a slowed pace naturally lowers the vocal register, which projects calm control. And, this connects directly to another masterful vocal technique, famously utilized by Barack Obama.
Oh, purposeful pause power.
Yeah.
The 3-beat rule.
Exactly. Obama mastered the architecture of silence. When he delivered a highly complex concept, he would insert a 1 to 2 second processing pause.
Because there's a mechanical reason for this, right?
Yes, there is. When you hear a complicated idea, your auditory cortex literally needs a moment to encode that sound into short-term memory. If the speaker just keeps talking, the new words just overwrite the previous ones before they can settle.
Wow. So that pause gives the listener's brain the time to cement the concept.
Precisely. And then there's the dramatic pause.
Which is longer.
Much longer. 3 to 5 seconds of total silence before a big reveal. It creates an almost unbearable anticipation. Stanford research demonstrates that layering these processing pauses and dramatic pauses can boost an audience's information retention by up to 40%.
40% just from not speaking? That is incredible. So pace and pauses are powerful. But we also need to talk about pitch, the actual highness or lowness of the sound.
Pitch is where things get really controversial.
Yeah, because there was a study analyzing the 2012 U.S. House elections that completely blew my mind. What did the researchers find when they looked at the vocal pitch of the candidates?
They discovered that if a candidate dropped their baseline vocal pitch by just 40 hertz, which is roughly the auditory difference between middle C and the A below it on a piano keyboard, their statistical chance of winning the election increased by 13%.
13% just from a slight drop in pitch.
Yeah, the voters' brains instinctively equated that lower frequency with competence and strength.
But there is a massive caveat to that data, right? Like a total reversal depending on who is running against who.
A profound reversal. That 13% advantage only holds up when a male candidate is running against another male candidate. If a male candidate with a deeper voice runs against a female candidate, his chances of winning actually plummet by 25.8%.
Wait, really? Why does a biological advantage suddenly turn into a massive liability?
The hypothesis is that context changes the meaning of the biological signal. In a male-female contest, a man artificially lowering his voice crosses a subconscious line. Voters stop perceiving it as authoritative and start perceiving it as overtly aggressive or, domineering.
So the social dominance cue misfires.
Exactly, and it completely backfires on the candidate.
Okay, but I need to look at the other side of this. If our brains are biologically wired to view lower voices as more competent, are people with naturally high or soft-spoken voices just disqualified from leadership out of the gate?
That's a huge concern for a lot of people.
Right. Like, are they doomed to lose boardroom battles because of their anatomy?
It is a common fear. But the anatomy isn't a life sentence. Vocal authority isn't strictly about having a naturally cavernous, deep voice. It is about physical resonance.
What's the difference?
It's specifically the difference between throat resonance and chest resonance. Many people, especially when they're anxious, speak from their throat. They tense their vocal cords, which produces a thin, reedy sound that subconsciously signals stress.
It sounds tight. Pinched, almost.
Because of physically is pinched. But if you learn to support your breath using your diaphragm, pulling air deep into your lungs and letting the sound vibrate through the larger cavity of your chest, you create acoustic depth.
So you aren't actually changing your natural pitch?
No, not at all. You are maximizing the instrument you already have. Chest resonance signals physical relaxation and capacity, which people interpret as true, unforced confidence.
It's wild that a 40 hertz drop or a slight vibration in the chest can entirely alter our perception of a human being. But why is our biology so easily hacked by these vocal cues?
It's a great question.
Why are we so obsessed with projecting and detecting authority in the first place?
To answer that, we have to pull back the lens and look at evolutionary psychology. Specifically, a framework called dual strategies theory. This theory suggests that humans did not evolve just one way to climb the social ladder. We developed two entirely distinct evolutionary pathways to achieve status.
Dominance and prestige. Let's break those down because they feel like polar opposites.
They really are.
Dominance is the primitive brute force approach. It relies on inducing fear, coercion, and selfishly hoarding resources so that others have to depend on you.
Right, and it's heavily associated with hubristic pride.
And I was fascinated to learn it even has a physical posture, like a slight downward tilt of the head, forcing others to look up at you or look away.
Yeah, dominance is essentially the tactic of taking power by force or intimidation. Prestige, however, is a uniquely human strategy.
Because it doesn't rely on fear.
Exactly. It relies on freely sharing your valuable skills, knowledge, and expertise with the community. You don't take status. It is freely conferred upon you by the group out of genuine respect.
And physically, prestige is associated with authentic pride and an upward, open head tilt. It perfectly describes a high school group project to me.
Well, how so?
Well, the dominant student is the bully who aggressively dictates what goes on the PowerPoint slides so they guarantee themselves an A. Everyone complies, but everyone secretly hates working with them.
So true.
But the prestige student is the genuinely smart, helpful kid that everyone voluntarily clusters around when they don't understand the assignment.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And from an evolutionary standpoint, Both strategies have survived for thousands of years because they serve different biological functions. We see this vividly when researchers study human mating patterns,
Right, humans engage in what evolutionary biologists call strategic pluralism.
which essentially means we don't just want one thing. Our desires shift based on our immediate needs.
Makes sense.
In mating studies, women often demonstrate a preference for dominant men in the context of short-term encounters. Subconsciously, dominance can be a biological marker for physical protection and robust genes.
But for long term.
When evaluating a partner for a long-term, reliable relationship, the preference shifts overwhelmingly toward prestigious men who exhibit cooperative, sharing behaviors.
And the trade-offs are just as pronounced when we look at modern leadership, right? Like a dominant leader will prioritize their own power over the actual success of the company. If they feel threatened by a highly competent employee, they will actively sabotage their own group's cohesion.
They absolutely will. They will isolate the skilled worker just to maintain control.
Which is toxic. But prestigious leaders have their own dangerous blind spots, too.
Very much so. Because their entire status relies on being universally liked and respected, they can become paralyzed when unpopular decisions need to be made. They might prioritize social harmony over making the ruthless, necessary cuts required for the group to actually survive.
So, what does this all mean? Are we hardwired at birth to be either a dominance person or a prestige person? Or can we consciously code switch between the two, depending on the situation?
These are behavioral strategies, not fixed genetic traits. Humans are incredibly adept at code switching. If a corporate team is facing intense external competition, say a rival company is trying to seal their market share,
They might need a fighter.
right, the group might intuitively elevate a dominant, aggressive leader to go to war. But during times of stability and internal building, they will demand a prestige-based collaborator. We adapt our strategies to the threat level of our environment.
So if we are constantly navigating these dominance and prestige strategies, trying to figure out who holds the power, where does this clash happen most visibly?
It happens in our everyday conversations, specifically the battle for the floor. Who gets to speak and who gets interrupted?
Oh, interruptions aren't just rude, they are a tool,
A
right?
very precise tool. Sociologically speaking, an interruption is a real-time mechanical tool used to organize and enforce a social hierarchy.
And the data on who uses this tool against whom is incredibly frustrating. What does the research show regarding gender dynamics in a typical conversation?
Well, in a standard 3-minute dialogue, men will interrupt women an average of 2.1 times. They only interrupt other men 1.8 times.
Wow.
Statistically, women are 33% more likely to be interrupted overall, but the most damaging metric is the aftermath. Women are 20% less likely to actually receive credit for their ideas when they finally do manage to speak.
It's a structural conversational imbalance, but there are tactical ways to defend against it, right? Without escalating the situation into a shouting match.
Yes, using scripted defenses.
Like if someone attempts a dominance interruption, you deploy a neutral, unyielding phrase like, I'd like to finish that thought, then I'll hear your input. You acknowledge them, but you absolutely refuse to cede the floor.
It's a textbook prestige move. You maintain your status, firmly but politely.
But I have to play devil's advocate here. Is interrupting always a malicious power grab for dominance? Because sometimes I interrupt someone simply because I am incredibly excited about what they are saying.
Right, you're not trying to dominate them.
No, I'm aggressively agreeing with them.
And linguists distinguish between those two very different actions. What you are describing is called cooperative overlapping. It occurs constantly among close friends or in highly creative brainstorming environments.
So what's the difference?
The crucial difference lies in the intent and the structural outcome. A dominant interruption derails the original speaker's point and hijacks the conversational floor. Cooperative overlapping supports the speaker's point, adds energy to it, and leaves the original speaker in control of the narrative.
The fascinating part is how these conversational rules change the moment you cross a border. You can't just memorize one set of nonverbal cues.
Oh, definitely not.
I liken navigating international business conversations to playing a video game where the control buttons randomly change meaning on every level. If you use American conversational pauses in Italy, you will never speak.
That is so true. Italy is a high-contact, highly expressive culture. Using your hands is an integral part of holding the conversational floor. If you want to interject, you might literally have to reach out, gently grasp the other person's hands mid-air, and lower them.
Which is wild because in the US or the UK, physically grabbing someone's hands to silence them would be considered a wildly aggressive dominance display.
Yeah, but in Italy, it's just Tuesday.
Even something as mundane as a business handshake is a complete minefield. A standard American handshake involves 5 to 7 pumps. British professionals expect 3 to 5. Germans prefer a highly efficient 1 to 2 pumps before releasing.
So if an American pumps a German colleague's hand 7 times,
The American thinks they are projecting enthusiasm, but the German's brain subconsciously registers an overbearing, dominant threat. We use all of these cues, the handshakes, the interruptions, the pace of our voices, to manage our own status in the world. But we also use them to relentlessly judge everyone else around us. And the scary truth is, our brains are exceptionally lazy, which leads us straight into a massive psychological blind spot.
the judgment trap,
Right.
also known in cognitive psychology as the fundamental attribution error, or the FAE. This is the innate human tendency to overemphasize a person's core character traits based on a single action, while completely ignoring the situational or environmental context that is actually driving their behavior.
Like, what is actually happening in our neural pathways to cause such a massive misjudgment?
It's basically an energy conservation tactic. The human brain consumes a massive amount of calories just to process information. To survive, it relies on perceptual salience and cognitive simplification.
Meaning what?
Well, when you see a person doing something, that person is the loudest moving, most visually salient object in your field of vision. The invisible context, their recent trauma, the confusing environment around them, the external stressors, requires heavy cognitive lifting to calculate. The brain essentially says, I don't have the energy to compute the invisible environment, so I'm just going to label the visible person.
Okay, it's like watching an intense action movie, but the camera is zoomed in on a tight close-up of the lead actor's face. You can't see the giant CGI monster chasing them in the background. You're just sitting in the theater thinking, wow, that guy sure looks sweaty and unprofessional. You blame his character because you can't see the context.
That is the fundamental attribution error in a nutshell. You see an aggressive driver weaving dangerously through traffic, and you instantly categorize them as a terrible, selfish human being. You don't expend the energy to consider they might have a child having an allergic reaction in the back seat and they're desperately rushing to a hospital.
Or, in a professional setting, a presenter's voice shakes, so the audience labels them incompetent, completely oblivious to the fact that the presenter spent 40 meticulous hours preparing the data and simply suffers from clinical public speaking anxiety.
Precisely.
But does everyone's brain do this equally, or is there a cultural element to how we judge?
There is a massive cultural divide, actually. Individualistic cultures, heavily concentrated in the United States and Western Europe, are highly prone to the fundamental attribution error.
Because they focus on the individual.
Right. Their societal framework prioritizes personal agency and individual responsibility above all else. But collectivist cultures, such as those in Japan or India, naturally train their citizens to observe the background and the broader situational context before making snap judgments about an individual's character.
If our brains naturally seek cognitive simplification, isn't the fundamental attribution error actually a highly efficient survival mechanism? Don't we need these mental shortcuts to function?
Heuristics, these mental shortcuts, are absolutely essential for physical survival. If someone is charging at you with a weapon, you do not have the luxury of pondering their complex childhood trauma. You must react to the immediate threat.
Obviously.
But we are applying a primitive jungle survival mechanism to a nuanced corporate office. In modern, complex social environments, that shortcut causes catastrophic misjudgments that destroy interpersonal relationships.
And the irony is, while we are spectacularly misjudging other people's actions, we are also profoundly misjudging how other people perceive us, especially when we actively try to signal our own status to win them over. Let's look at the status signals paradox.
Oh, this phenomenon highlights a fascinating disconnect between how we present ourselves and how human beings actually evaluate each other.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you move to a new city. You know no one, and you want to make some close, authentic friends. The instinct for many people is to display high status markers. You think, if I roll up to the neighborhood barbecue in a brand new BMW, wearing a sleek Tag Heuer watch and a designer shirt, people will see I am successful and they'll naturally want to be my friend.
But behavioral economics shows the reality is the exact opposite. When evaluating a potential friend, People overwhelmingly prefer individuals displaying neutral or low status markers.
Yeah.
They actually want to befriend the person driving the 10-year-old Honda, wearing a generic digital watch and a plain shirt from Walmart.
I compare this to bringing a lavish 5-tier, professionally baked fondant wedding cake to a casual neighborhood potluck. Yes, it is objectively magnificent, but it instantly makes everyone else's homemade potato salad look terrible, so they secretly resent you.
That resentment is rooted in social comparison theory. A friendship is fundamentally designed to be an egalitarian relationship. Potential friends want to avoid the psychological discomfort of being outranked.
Nobody wants to feel inferior.
Exactly. If you lead with luxury signals, you are instantly asserting dominance and establishing a hierarchy. You create a barrier to genuine emotional connection because the other person feels they have to compete with you.
But there is a glaring exception to this paradox. It completely flips the moment you step into a professional networking event. If the goal changes from making friends to making business contacts, the data shifts dramatically.
It really does. 90% of presenters chose to display the luxury car, and remarkably, almost 90% of the evaluators actively wanted to connect with the person driving the luxury car.
Because the entire context shifts from affective value to instrumental value. In a friendship, the value is how the person makes you feel. In business, the value is what resources this person can provide to help you succeed.
Right. A high-status signal in a professional environment implies competence, wealth, and valuable connections. People want access to that network, so they overlook the psychological discomfort of the hierarchy.
What if the person you are trying to befriend is also incredibly wealthy and driving a BMW? Does this paradox only apply across different socioeconomic classes?
Researchers tested that exact scenario in what's known as the wealthy hypocrisy study. They surveyed participants whose household incomes were over $100,000. Astonishingly, even the wealthy participants, when specifically looking for a genuine friend, preferred the person in the basic neutral car over the person in the luxury car.
Wow.
Yeah, the deep-seated human aversion to being one-upped exists at every single level of the economic ladder.
So with all of these invisible traps, the biological vocal cues, the evolutionary dominance battles, the cultural landmines, the constant misjudgments, how does a person stay grounded? How do you take back control of your own communication when the matrix is this complex?
It requires a deliberate commitment to emotion regulation. We have to consciously manage our internal physiological reactions to these external triggers. The research points heavily to the work of psychologist Mark Brackett, who stresses that emotion regulation is not an innate personality trait. It is a highly technical, learned skill.
His central philosophy is that emotions are data, not obstacles. I think of it like the dashboard warning lights in your car.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. If the check engine light suddenly flashes red, you don't grab a hammer and smash the light. That is emotional suppression. You also don't ignore it and keep driving until the engine explodes. You pull over, open the hood, and diagnose the engine. That is emotional regulation.
And that diagnosis is a multi-step process. Effective regulation involves recognizing the physical spike of adrenaline in your body, consciously taking deep breaths to calm your nervous system, cognitively reframing your negative thoughts, and most importantly, forcing a pause before you react.
Just a slight pause.
Yes, that micro-pause disrupts the brain's instinct to launch a dominant counterattack.
The sources outline a real-world story that perfectly encapsulates mastering the skill in real time. The author was at a crowded restaurant for a New Year's Eve dinner. He noticed a family sitting at a nearby table, and they were all wearing hats loudly supporting a specific political candidate.
Okay.
As the author walked past their table, he simply smiled and nodded politely. But as soon as he sat down, one of the men from that table turned his chair around, took off his political hat, looked the author dead in the eye, and pointed aggressively at the logo on the hat.
He was implicitly demanding some kind of validation or perhaps trying to provoke a confrontation.
Right. It is an incredibly tense moment. Sociologically, the man pointing at the hat is initiating a clear, aggressive dominance display in a public space.
Exactly. And the author's internal dashboard lights must have been flashing red.
But instead of engaging in tribalism, escalating the tension, or falling victim to the fundamental attribution error by deciding this man was entirely defined by his hat, the author actively regulated his nervous system. He consciously separated the man's core human identity from his political beliefs.
How did he respond?
He offered a gentle, unbothered smile and simply winked at the man to completely diffuse the tension.
That interaction is the epitome of mastering the matrix. The author bypassed his own primitive survival instincts, refused to engage in a meaningless dominance battle, and maintained absolute control over his own emotional baseline.
But I do have a lingering concern about all of this. If we spend every waking hour intensely regulating our emotions, planning our pauses to the exact millisecond, calibrating the hertz of our voice, and agonizing over whether our watch is sending the correct status signal, do we risk losing our authentic selves entirely?
Like becoming a robot.
Yeah, does mastering these tools just turn us into highly manipulative communication robots?
It's a natural fear, but in practice, the exact opposite occurs. Think of a master jazz musician.
Okay.
For years, they must rigorously study the rigid mathematics of scales, the strict rules of timing, and complex music theory. It feels incredibly robotic at first, but once those technical rules are deeply internalized, the musician doesn't sound like a machine.
They just play.
Right. Their mastery of the underlying structure is precisely what gives them the freedom to close their eyes, improvise wildly, and express their truest, most authentic soul.
Oh, wow.
Understanding the mechanics of communication doesn't erase your authenticity. It ensures that your authentic self is actually transmitted clearly to the world without being distorted by the matrix.
That is an incredible way to view it. So, bringing this all together for you, the listener, from the meticulous 150 word per minute pace of your speech, to the brand of the shirt you choose for a picnic, to the invisible assumptions your brain makes about the person cutting you off in traffic, you are constantly participating in an intricate, ancient dance of status, prestige, and human connection.
And you now possess the cheat codes to this environment. You understand that strategic silence can command a room far more effectively than shouting. You recognize that choosing neutral, unassuming signals will attract deeper, more genuine friendships than flaunting wealth. And you know that mastering your own emotional regulation is the ultimate key to navigating tense ideological standoffs with absolute grace.
But before we let you go, there is one final provocative question built right into the foundation of the research we explored today.
We have clearly established that human perception, our deep-seated instinct to trust, follow, or submit to someone, is biologically hardwired to respond to incredibly subtle mechanical cues. A 40 hertz drop in pitch, a perfectly executed 3-second pause, a specific visual status marker.
So what happens when artificial intelligence learns to flawlessly exploit those exact biological loopholes?
If an AI algorithm can perfectly synthesize the ideal acoustic chest resonance, calculate the optimal cognitive speaking rhythm, and generate the exact visual cues designed to trigger our brain the deepest evolutionary dominance and prestige receptors, will the most persuasive, trusted, and dominant leaders of our future even be human?
It is enough to make you look back at that simple, clean text message and wish the world was still that straightforward. Keep your eyes open out there, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.